The rain was hitting the windshield so hard I could barely see the streetlights outside my family's house. Inside, my mother was holding a black trash bag, her face completely blank, while my father stood behind her with his arms crossed. They didn't even wait for the dirt to settle on my grandmother's grave before they threw me out like yesterday's garbage. I remember the cold plastic of the bag tearing slightly as my mother shoved it into my chest, her voice cutting through the sound of the storm. She told me I didn't belong there anymore, that the house was theirs, and that I had 24 hours to disappear from their lives completely. I stood on the porch, soaked to the bone, watching the heavy oak door slam shut in my face. The lock clicked with a sound so final it felt like a physical blow to my chest. They thought they had won. They thought that by burying Nana, they had buried the only person who ever protected me from their greed. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly conceive as they stood inside that warm, well-lit house, was that Nana had anticipated this exact moment. Deep inside her old, locked mahogany desk was a document they had overlooked, a hidden legal reality that was about to turn their entire world upside down. They thought they were kicking me out of their house, but they were actually locking themselves into a trap of their own making. Right now, I am sitting in a tiny, rented room that smells like old carpets and damp paint. My whole life is packed into 3 cardboard boxes resting against the peeling wallpaper. My hands are still shaking as I look at my phone, watching the group chat notifications bubble up from my extended family. My aunts, uncles, and cousins are already talking about the estate sale, discussing which pieces of Nana's antique furniture they want to claim, and praising my parents for taking charge of the family legacy. No one is asking where I am. No one is asking how I'm surviving. To them, I have simply been erased. The injustice of it burns in the back of my throat like acid. For the past 5 years, I was the one who stayed behind. I was the one who changed Nana's sheets, cooked her meals, held her hand during the terrifying midnight panic attacks, and listened to her stories when her mind started to drift. My parents were always too busy. They had vacations to take, corporate ladders to climb, and a social status to maintain. They only showed up when there was a holiday photo to be taken, smiling for the camera to show everyone what a perfect, loving family we were. And the moment Nana's heart stopped beating, their smiles vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating hunger. Yesterday, my father looked me dead in the eye and said that my time living off the family's generosity was over. He called me a parasite. He said that because I spent my 20s caregiving instead of building a corporate career, I had no right to a single square inch of the property. They told the rest of the family that I voluntarily walked away because I couldn't handle the grief. The sheer scale of their lie is breathtaking. They have completely controlled the narrative, turning the entire family against me before I could even find a place to sleep. But as I sit here on this creaking mattress, my fingers trace the edge of a small, tarnished brass key hidden in the lining of my jacket. It's the key Nana gave me 3 weeks before she passed away, with a whisper that makes total sense to me only now. To understand how we got here, you have to understand what that house used to be. Nana's house was a massive, sprawling Victorian structure with a wraparound porch and a garden that smelled of lavender and damp earth. When I was a child, that place was my sanctuary. My parents were always intense, demanding, and conditional with their love. If I didn't get straight A's, my father wouldn't speak to me for a week. If I didn't dress the way my mother wanted, she would sigh and act as if I were a profound disappointment. But at Nana's house, the air was different. It was safe. I remember the kitchen vividly. It had these old yellow and white checkered tiles that were cracked near the pantry. Nana would sit at the wooden table, wearing an apron that had flour stains older than I was, humming some melody from the 1950s. When things became too loud or too tense at my parents' house, I would walk the 3 blocks to Nana's. She never asked me what went wrong. She would just pull out a chair, pour me a glass of milk, and hand me a piece of warm apple pie. "You have a soft heart," she told me once, her wrinkled hands covering mine. "The world is hard on soft hearts. You have to learn when to protect it and when to fight." As Nana grew older, her vibrant energy began to fade. Her joints stiffened, her steps slowed, and eventually the massive Victorian house became too much for her to manage alone. When she suffered her first minor stroke 5 years ago, my parents immediately started talking about selling the place and moving her into a care facility. I remember the absolute terror in Nana's eyes when they discussed it right in front of her, talking about her as if she were already gone. She looked at the walls she had lived in for 50 years, the garden she had planted with her own hands, and she wept quietly. I couldn't let them do it. I dropped out of my university courses, gave up my apartment, and moved into the small guest room upstairs to become her full-time caregiver. My parents were thrilled at the time, though they hid it behind a mask of reluctant approval. They told me it was a noble sacrifice, but what they really meant was that I was saving them tens of thousands of dollars in professional care costs. For 5 years, my daily routine was dictated by timers, fill bottles, and physical therapy schedules. I learned how to lift her without straining my back. I learned the exact temperature she liked her tea, and how to distract her when the dementia began to set in and she forgot what year it was. It was exhausting, draining work that left me with no social life and no savings, but I didn't care. In those quiet evenings when the house was completely still and we watched old movies together, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Nana had moments of profound clarity. During one of those moments, about a year ago, she looked at me with an intensity that startled me. "They think they are going to take this place and sell it to a developer," she whispered, her voice surprisingly steady. "Your father has already looked at the blueprints, but they don't know the history of this land, and they don't know me." I thought it was just the paranoia of old age at the time. I just smiled, patted her hand, and told her to not worry about it. I never realized she was laying the groundwork for a massive counterstrike. The shift in my parents' behavior began long before Nana actually passed away. It started subtly, like a slight drop in temperature before a massive storm. About 6 months ago, my father began showing up at the house unannounced on Saturday mornings. He wouldn't bring groceries or ask how Nana was feeling. Instead, he would walk through the rooms, looking at the crown molding, tapping the walls, and taking notes on his phone. One afternoon, I caught him in the basement examining the main support beams with a flashlight. When I asked him what he was doing, he jumped slightly, his eyes narrowing before he quickly forced a smile. "Just checking the structural integrity, kiddo," he said, his voice entirely too casual. "Old houses like this can rot from the inside out. We need to know what we're dealing with for future planning." My mother, on the other hand, focused on the belongings. She started asking me to catalog Nana's jewelry and the silver sets stored in the dining room buffet. She would call me under the guise of checking in on my mental health, but within 2 minutes, the conversation would always drift toward Nana's assets. "It's just that we have to be practical," my mother said during one phone call, the sound of her manicuring her nails audible through the receiver. "We're just trying to lighten the load for everyone. You should start identifying which items you want to keep for sentimental value before we bring in an appraiser." I remember feeling a sick sensation in my stomach. Nana was sitting right in front of me, breathing heavily through her oxygen concentrator, completely unaware that her own daughter was already dividing up her life like spoils of war. When I told my mother that it was inappropriate to talk about these things while Nana was still alive, her tone instantly hardened. "Don't get self-righteous with me," she snapped. "We are the adults here, and we are paying the property taxes on that estate. You're just a live-in companion. Remember your place." The favoritism in our family became glaring during the final months.
My older brother, Julian, who had not visited Nana once in 3 years, suddenly became the center of my parents' attention. Julian was a corporate lawyer in the city, the golden child who checked every single box my parents ever wanted. They bought him a brand new luxury SUV for his birthday and bragged about his promotions to anyone who would listen. One evening, my parents came over for a rare family dinner. Julian was with them. Throughout the entire meal, they talked over me, ignored my updates about Nana's changing medical needs, and focused entirely on Julian's upcoming wedding. At one point, Julian looked around the dining room and said, "You know, this place would make an incredible modern duplex if we tore down the front porch and opened up the floor plan. The lot size alone is worth a fortune in this zip code." My father raised his glass in a toast. "Exactly what I was thinking, son. A real investment opportunity." I sat there, completely invisible at the table, watching them plan the destruction of the house while Nana slept upstairs. When I tried to speak up, pointing out that Nana wanted the house preserved, my father set his glass down with a heavy thud. "You don't have a say in financial matters. Look at your bank account. We've tolerated your little lifestyle choice because it kept her out of a home, but don't confuse your caretaking duties with ownership." That was the first clear indicator that the moment Nana's pulse stopped, my expiration date in that house would arrive.
The day Nana passed away was a Tuesday. It was quiet, peaceful, just a gentle slowing of her breath until there was nothing left. I was holding her hand when it happened. I called my parents immediately, my voice cracking with grief. They arrived within 40 minutes, but they didn't come to mourn. They arrived with a legal clipboard and a set of heavy-duty locks. While the paramedics were still downstairs, my mother went straight to Nana's bedroom and began pulling drawers out of the vanity, looking for her jewelry boxes. My father stood in the hallway, looking at me with a cold, detached expression. "The funeral will be kept small and private," he said, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "We don't need a massive production. And as for you, we need you to pack up your things. We've already contacted a real estate agent, and they need the house completely empty by Friday for staging." I was stunned. Friday? That's 3 days from now. I've lived here for 5 years. I don't have savings, Dad. I didn't work a regular job because I was taking care of your mother. "That was your choice," he replied smoothly, checking his watch. "You could have gotten a remote job. You chose to sit here and play nurse. We provided you with free room and board for half a decade. Consider that your compensation. We're locking the house down on Friday morning. Anything left inside will be thrown out." The next 48 hours were a blur of absolute nightmare. The funeral was a farce. My parents spent the entire time playing the role of grieving children to the local community, receiving condolences with practiced tears. But the second we returned to the house after the service, the masks came off permanently. My brother Julian showed up with a moving truck. They didn't even wait for me to pack. They began carrying out pieces of furniture around me while I was trying to put my clothes into boxes. My mother went into the kitchen and started wrapping Nana's antique china in newspaper, completely ignoring my presence. When I tried to stop Julian from taking a small wooden rocking chair that Nana had promised me, he shoved past me, using his shoulder to push me against the wall. "Get out of the way," Julian sneered. "This chair is worth $2,000 at auction. You don't own anything here. Dad said you have until tonight now because the cleaners are coming early tomorrow, so take your trash bags and get out." I ran to my father, who was standing by the fireplace, looking at a framed photo of Nana. "Are you really going to let him do this? You're throwing me out on the street." My father didn't even look at me. He kept his eyes on the fireplace. "We are settling an estate. You are an adult and you need to figure out your own life. We've supported your lack of ambition for long enough. The locks are being changed at 6 p.m. I suggest you be gone before the locksmith arrives, or I will have the police remove you for trespassing." The betrayal felt like a heavy weight crushing my lungs. My own parents, people who were supposed to provide safety, were treating me worse than an unwanted tenant. They had used me for 5 years as free labor to avoid paying for an assisted living facility, and the very second that labor was no longer required, they discarded me without a single shred of remorse. I packed what little I could fit into 3 boxes and a black trash bag, my hands shaking so violently I could barely tape the boxes shut. As the clock ticked down to 5:55 p.m., my father stood by the front door, pointedly holding it open while the rain began to pour outside. I walked past him into the storm, hearing the heavy lock click behind me. It was only on my 3rd night in the rented room that I remembered the small brass key. I had put it in the secret inside pocket of my winter coat, completely forgetting about it during the trauma of the eviction. I pulled it out, holding it under the dim light bulb of my small room. It was an old-fashioned skeleton key, etched with fine, decorative lines that had grown dark with age. Suddenly, Nana's words from a year ago flashed through my mind. Deep inside the old mahogany desk, a document they overlooked. The mahogany desk was still in the house. My parents hadn't moved it yet because it was incredibly heavy, built directly into the alcove of the study upstairs. I knew they wouldn't have checked for secret compartments. My father didn't have the patience for old craftsmanship, and Julian only cared about things he could quickly appraise. I knew I had to get back into that house. The risk was immense. If my father caught me, he would absolutely call the police and have me arrested for breaking and entering. But the burning sense of injustice inside me outweighed the fear. I waited until 2 a.m. I put on dark clothes, pulled a hood over my head, and walked the 3 blocks back to Nana's house through the quiet, empty streets. The house loomed in the darkness, completely unlit, looking like a ghost of its former self. The real estate sign stuck in the front lawn gleamed under the street lamp. I didn't try the front door. I knew the locks had been changed. Instead, I crept around to the back porch, where there was a small, high window leading into the pantry. It was a window Nana always forgot to lock because the latch was loose. I pushed against the frame, and with a loud, terrifying creak, it slid upward. I hoisted myself up, crawling through the narrow opening and landing quietly on the linoleum floor inside. The house was freezing. The heat had been turned down to save money, and the familiar smell of lavender was already fading, replaced by the stale, dead air of an empty building. Holding my breath, I moved through the kitchen and up the back stairs, my feet knowing exactly which floorboards to avoid to prevent them from creaking. I entered the study. The massive mahogany desk stood against the wall like a silent giant. My heart was pounding so loudly against my ribs, I was certain someone outside could hear it. I pulled out the brass key and began examining the desk, looking for a keyhole that matched. There wasn't one on any of the standard drawers. I ran my fingers along the back paneling, underneath the main desk surface, and behind the small decorative pillars on the sides. Nothing. I sat down in the dusty desk chair, closing my eyes and trying to think, where would she hide it? I remembered how she used to love reading old mystery novels and how she always talked about the cleverness of old carpenters. I reached under the central drawer, my fingers brushing against a small, rough indentation in the wood that felt out of place. I pressed it. With a soft click, a tiny wooden panel on the left side of the desk popped open by 1/2 inch. My breath hitched. Inside the narrow hidden slot was a small iron keyhole. I inserted the brass key. It fit perfectly. I turned it clockwise, hearing a heavy mechanism slide open inside the desk's structure. A deep drawer at the bottom, which had previously seemed stuck and empty, slid open effortlessly. Inside sat a thick blue legal folder bound by a heavy rubber band. On the front, in Nana's elegant, unmistakable cursive, were the words,
to be opened only when they show their true colors. I opened the folder, using the flashlight on my phone to read the documents inside. It wasn't just a standard will, it was a comprehensive, legally binding trust and land deed restructuring, executed by a highly reputable estate attorney 3 years prior. As my eyes scanned the legal language, a feeling of pure shock washed over me. My parents had made a massive, fatal assumption. They thought the house belonged to them because my grandfather's original will from 30 years ago had left the property to Nana and my father as co-owners. But according to these new documents, my father had signed away his partial rights 15 years ago in exchange for a massive cash buyout from my grandfather to save his failing business, a transaction that was fully documented and attached to the deed. Nana owned the property 100% outright, and her new will didn't leave the house to her children. It stated that due to my 5 years of uncompensated full-time care, the entire property, along with all its contents and a substantial hidden savings account they knew nothing about, was left entirely to me. Furthermore, there was a specific clause. If my parents attempted to contest the will or evict me from the premises prior to probate, a penalty clause was triggered that completely stripped them of any minor sentimental heirlooms they were otherwise entitled to. I sat there in the dark, a wild, hysterical laugh bubbling up in my chest. They hadn't kicked me out of their house. They had illegally evicted my own property. I slipped out of the house the same way I came in, clutching the blue folder to my chest like a shield. The next morning, I didn't call my parents. I didn't send an angry text. Instead, I went straight to the office of Mr. Arthur Vance, the estate attorney whose name was stamped on the documents. Mr. Vance was an elderly man with sharp blue eyes and a calm, methodical demeanor. He looked at me over his reading glasses as I laid the documents on his desk. "Ah," Mr. Vance said, a faint smile touching his lips. "I wondered when you would come see me. Your grandmother spoke very highly of you. She knew exactly what your parents would do the moment she passed away. She wanted to make sure they showed their true nature before we revealed this." "They've already listed the house," I said, my voice tight. "They've hired an auction house to sell the furniture this coming Sunday. They think they're getting a massive payout." Mr. Vance checked his calendar, his expression hardening into something cold and professional. "Today is Thursday. The public estate sale and open house are scheduled for Sunday at noon, correct? Perfect. We have exactly 3 days. Do not say a word to them. Let them spend their own money on staging, advertising, and preparation. Let them invite the entire extended family and their business associates to witness their big day." The next 72 hours were an excruciating exercise in self-control. Every fiber of my being wanted to scream the truth at them, to show them that their greed had blinded them. My mother sent a mass email to the entire family, inviting everyone to a celebration of life and estate preview on Sunday morning at the house. The email was nauseatingly sweet, talking about how they were restructuring the family assets to honor Nana's memory. I received several texts from aunts and cousins asking why I wasn't helping with the setup. I didn't reply to any of them. I stayed in my tiny room, watching the clock tick down, working closely with Mr. Vance to prepare the necessary legal filings. We secured an emergency injunction, but we kept it completely quiet, waiting for the exact moment to serve it to maximize the impact. By Saturday night, I couldn't sleep. The emotional weight of the past 5 years, the exhaustion of caregiving, and the trauma of being thrown out into the rain were all swirling inside my head. I kept looking at the photos of Nana on my phone. I realized she hadn't just protected me out of charity, she had designed a profound lesson in accountability for her own son. She had given my parents 5 years to show a single shred of genuine compassion, to offer me help, or to treat me with dignity. They had failed every test. Sunday arrived, clear and bright. At exactly 11:30 a.m., I arrived at Nana's house. The street was lined with luxury cars. A massive printed banner hung across the front porch advertising the estate sale, and the front door was open wide, with elegant classical music playing from speakers inside. Prospective buyers, local real estate investors, and dozens of our extended family members were milling about the front yard and the living room, holding glasses of white wine. I walked up the steps, wearing the same simple clothes I had worn when they threw me out. The moment I stepped through the threshold, the music seemed to fade into the background. My mother, dressed in an expensive black designer dress, was standing in the center of the living room, gesturing toward Nana's antique grandfather clock as she spoke to a wealthy-looking couple. When her eyes caught mine, her expression instantly transformed from a polished sales smile to a mask of pure rage. She marched across the room, her high heels clicking loudly on the hardwood floor. "What are you doing here?" she whispered harshly, grabbing my arm and trying to pull me toward the hallway. "You were told not to come back here. You are embarrassing us. Look at you. You look like a vagrant. Get out before your father sees you." "I have every right to be here, Mom," I said, my voice calm, loud enough for a few nearby family members to turn their heads. My father appeared from the study, holding a clipboard. Seeing me, his jaw clenched, and he stepped forward, his corporate authority radiating off him like heat. "That's enough. Julian, call the police. We told this kid that trespassing wouldn't be tolerated." Julian stepped out from the crowd, his phone already in his hand, a smug grin on his face. "I told you you'd regret showing your face here again. You're done." The room went quiet. My aunts and uncles moved closer, murmuring among themselves. My Aunt Clara looked at me with a mixture of pity and disapproval. "Oh, honey, just leave. Don't make a scene today of all days." "I'm not making a scene," I said, looking directly at my father. "I'm just attending an open house on a property I care about. Surely your potential buyers want to know the full history of the estate before they place a bid?" My father stepped into my personal space, his voice dropping to a dangerous low rumble. "You don't know anything about business, and you don't know anything about this house. This house is mine. It has been in my family for decades, and I am selling it today. You have exactly 30 seconds to walk out that door, or I will personally drag you down those steps."
Actually, he won't be doing that. A calm, authoritative voice cut through the tension. The crowd parted as Mr. Arthur Vance walked through the front door. He was wearing a sharp, tailored three-piece suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Behind him stood a man in a uniform, a county sheriff's deputy holding a stack of legal documents. My father froze, his eyes shifting from Mr. Vance to the deputy. "Arthur, what is the meaning of this? This is a private estate matter. Why did you bring law enforcement into my home?" "Because, Richard, this is not your home," Mr. Vance said smoothly, placing his briefcase on Nana's pristine dining room table. He popped the latches open with 2 loud clicks that echoed through the silent room. "And you have no legal authority to sell a single blade of grass on this property." Julian stepped forward, trying to use his legal background to intimidate the older man. "Mr. Vance, I've reviewed my grandfather's original will. My father is a named co-owner of this deed. We have the legal right to liquidate the asset under the estate dissolution guidelines." Mr. Vance didn't even look at Julian. He pulled out a certified copy of the 2011 financial restructuring agreement from his briefcase and held it up. "Your grandfather bought out your partial share for $400,000 15 years ago to cover his bankrupt logistics company," Mr. Vance explained to the entire room, his voice carrying perfectly. "Your father signed a complete relinquishment of all future claims to this deed. That document was recorded with the county clerk. He has 0 ownership interest in this property." My mother's face drained of color. She looked at my father, whose expression had turned a sickening shade of gray. "Richard, what is he talking about? You told me you owned half this house." My father couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Mr. Vance then pulled out the thick blue folder, the true last will and testament of my grandmother.
Furthermore, under the terms of the fully executed living trust established 3 years ago, the entirety of this estate, including the real property, all physical assets inside, and the primary liquid accounts, has been left solely and exclusively to your younger child. Mr. Vance turned to me, bowing his head slightly. To the one person who actually cared for her, while the rest of you treated her like a financial line item. The deputy stepped forward, handing a paper to my father. "Richard, this is an emergency court injunction. This estate sale is officially shut down. Furthermore, as the legal owner of this property has filed a complaint regarding an illegal eviction and the unauthorized removal of property, you, your wife, and your older son have exactly 15 minutes to remove yourselves from the premises." The silence in the room was absolute. The wealthy buyers looked at each other in embarrassment, quietly setting down their wine glasses and heading toward the door. My extended family members stood frozen, their eyes wide as they realized the massive lie my parents had spun. The power dynamic in that room shifted so violently that you could practically feel the air pressure change. My father looked down at the court order, his hands trembling so violently the paper rattled. He was completely stripped of his authority, exposed in front of everyone he had spent his life trying to impress. The fallout was immediate and devastating for them. Within an hour, the house was completely empty of buyers and family members. My parents and Julian had to leave under the watchful eye of the sheriff's deputy. I watched from the front porch, the very same porch where they had thrown me out in the rain, as my father slumped into the driver's seat of his car, looking broken and aged by 20 years. The legal consequences didn't stop with the injunction. Because Julian had already moved several high-value antique items out of the house to his own apartment, Mr. Vance filed a formal charge of asset conversion and civil theft against him. To save his career at his law firm, Julian had to return every single item within 48 hours, completely humiliated, delivering the furniture back to the house himself while refusing to meet my eyes. My parents tried to mount a legal challenge to contest the will, claiming that Nana wasn't of sound mind when she signed it. But Mr. Vance was 3 steps ahead. He produced video recordings of the signing ceremony, along with evaluations from 2 independent medical professionals confirming her absolute cognitive clarity on that day. When the lawsuit failed, the penalty clause in the will was automatically triggered. My parents were completely stripped of the small cash allowances Nana had originally left them for sentimental purposes. They got absolutely nothing. The social humiliation was perhaps the hardest part for them to bear. The local real estate community and our extended family quickly learned the details of how they had treated me during those 5 years of caregiving. The aunts and uncles who had once praised my parents for taking charge completely distanced themselves, embarrassed to be associated with such blatant cruelty. My mother stopped attending her social clubs, unable to face the whispers of her peers. Their greed hadn't just cost them a house, it had utterly dismantled the pristine reputation they had spent decades manufacturing.
A few months later, the house was quiet again. The printed banners were gone, the luxury cars were gone, and the air once again smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. I spent the afternoon walking through the rooms, feeling a profound sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a very long time. I didn't sell the house to a developer. I didn't turn it into a modern duplex. I kept it exactly as it was, maintaining the garden Nana loved and preserving the kitchen with the cracked checkered tiles. I stood in the study, looking at the mahogany desk. I realized that Nana's final gift to me wasn't just financial security or a roof over my head. It was the gift of justice. She had given me the means to stand up for myself, to prove that compassion and dedication hold a value that cannot be measured in a corporate bank account. I haven't spoken to my parents or my brother since that Sunday afternoon. They have chosen to view themselves as the victims of a bitter family dispute, completely unable to see that their own actions caused their downfall. I don't feel anger toward them anymore. The burning resentment that once choked me has been replaced by a quiet, steady strength. I learned how to protect my soft heart, just like Nana told me to. Looking back on this entire experience, I realized that family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who will discard you the moment it serves their interests, and the people who truly love you will find a way to protect you even after they are gone. Have you ever experienced a situation where a family member showed their true colors over money or an inheritance? How did you handle the betrayal, and did you manage to find closure? Let me know your thoughts and stories in the comments below. I read every single one of them. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that justice always finds a way. Thank you for listening.